Hello, I am Vitold and this is my honest review of a Ducati Multistrada V2, which is an evolution of a previous Multistrada 950. Right now it's the only adventure touring motorcycle in Ducati's lineup that stays loyal to brand's heritage and not only to red color but also to a V-twin engine. Larger Multistrada V4 uses a 4-cylinder engine now, so if you're feeling like you desperately need a twin, the V2 is your option. And it's a middleweight adventure motorcycle, so a segment below that a V4. So after spending some time with this red V2 S, I started wondering why this bike even exists, and since it does, who needs it? Just by looking at it, I'm seeing a Multistrada V4, am I not? Or looking at a V4, I'm seeing the V2. They're almost identical, that's the bottom line here. The only thing that is significant is the display, that in V2 looks like taken from an old Multistrada 1200 or 1260. Ducati clearly had a reason and will to make it look so similar to the more powerful and the more expensive model. But still, why? And looking at the prices, you should already forget about the non-V2S version, so the one without the letter S. It's a version that exists basically only to be able to present a lower price in a catalog or in a price list. It doesn't have cruise control, it doesn't have a full LED front light, you've got to pay extra for it to get a quick shifter, there is no semi-active suspension, and it doesn't even have backlit switches. Or the screen is a thing from like 15 years ago, and it seems as if Ducati had to open a separate assembly line, employ different workers and machines to handle the effort. The sheer effort of creating a Multistrada V2 without those features. So yeah, then this V2S ended up being more expensive than a base BMW R1250 GS, at least here. And I'm not gonna tell you how all that sounds, like up to you. On the other hand, they went and took some parts like the mirrors and rims from a Multistrada V4. Yet the bike itself is quite intriguing, as its 937 cubic centimeter 2-cylinder engine with 113 horsepower and 94 Nm of torque is quite a juicy beast. But when you approach it, it seems big, and it is. It's not really a smaller brother, it may be a slimmer brother that's also a bit lighter, and if you pay attention, you may notice it after sitting on the Multistrada V2 that it feels a little bit sort of more light to deal with. Yes, it feels easy to manage, and I do like that. All the switches on the handlebar are similar to those in other Ducatis, especially the bigger Multistradas. There aren't many of them, but some have different functions depending on how you use them, either pressing or pressing and holding. Some options like modifying riding modes don't work while riding, so beware instead of searching for them forever. The seat seems narrow, and that may be surprising since it's already mounted lower than in pretty much all big adventure motorcycles, including the Multistrada V4. As here in the V2, it's at 83 centimeters. But if you're a shorter rider and already got your hopes high because of low and narrow seat, then I've got to cool you down, as the seat is so hard that it almost perfectly maintains its shape and you do not sag into it. In some motorcycles, this would mean that in fact you would be sitting lower, but not exactly here. So it's in the end comparable with some other motorcycles that might originally be having their seats higher, but they sag. And well, the seat here is not height adjustable, by the way. But you may buy an even lower seat or even lower the whole bike further. So in the end, it is all good unless you're 70 plus and you very quickly shrink. On the seat, I almost immediately started feeling that hard surface under my everything. It is sort of bumped up, with the central point being the highest, and then going down on the sides. It's kind of like this. So it hurts, as it's like sitting on top of a pole basically in some spots, and you may move a bit forward, you may move a little bit backward, but not that much. So for me, it would end up in sitting in an awkward position, and it's overall quite uncomfortable on the Multistrada V2 for me because of that seat. It's like you're sitting, but you wish you were standing up. So all my muscles were pretty tight, trying to lift me from that position. So yeah, thank you for trying my body. You didn't help, but still thank you. Then there's the handlebar, which seems super crazy wide, with the grips far forward also, to the point of it being, well, a little bit even overwhelming to me. And I would sit with my arms straightened up fully, basically. Surprising for a mid-adventure adventure bike. There are also front indicators incorporated into the handguards, which are unfortunately sticking a lot to the sides, making filtering traffic harder. Now, once you taste that juicy engine, you may from time to time forget about the position and about your hurting butt, especially that foot pegs are in pretty nice and comfortable places, for me at least, being 183 centimeters tall or 6 feet tall. And I was right there able to overall sit pretty upright. And yes, that engine is sweet in the second half of the RPM range. It is really eager to shoot you forward and to be ridden this way. The bike does not seem any slower than most big adventure motorcycles. That is something, especially if you would count in a V-Strom 1050 and Africa Twin 1100 that are less powerful than this mid-weight still. The Ducati and also Kawasaki Versys 1000 with a similar amount of power in this V2. The torque may be slightly lower in the Multistrada V2 at just 94 Newton meters, but that's still not just, and that's still not far behind these bikes with larger capacity engines. So it's explosive, it's ready, and it's sounding pretty nicely. On the other hand, this engine, well, it goes to sleep below 4,000 RPM. If you're there on a third, fourth gear, it will struggle. It will hate you, and it will shake like Shakira's ass during a live concert. And you can see that by looking at the display right in front of me. It then seems like it wants to jump away onto the sidewalk and just continue on foot. Forget about riding below 4,000 RPM on even higher gears, as the engine is just dead. Sixth gear may be used basically just to keep the speed steady. Fifth is pretty much the most what I managed to comfortably use. And this might be a downside of this bike, of this engine. The juice is there, but you've got to get it at high RPM. So if you're a slow rider, I would think twice if it's not better to look actually somewhere else, as the bike won't likely be happy, and you might also not be happy too because of that. Then you've got different riding modes, which you may also set the way you want, with 1,000 different letters and numbers there in the onboard computer. And this is also where you may adjust the suspension, and I'll get back to it, as it works in a way that on one hand is amazing, and on the other one it boils my blood. In engine responses, there are significant differences between the modes. In a normal mode, it's normal, it's smooth, and you've got to roll the throttle a lot to make it move. In a more sporty setting, it's then instant, and it is quite aggressive, which is great at speed, but not maybe when you're trying to conquer your way through a roundabout, as it starts shaking when you just close and open the throttle. It lacks some precision here. And this leads me to the ride-by-wire throttle, which gives a super numb feeling that is there in the bigger Multistrada as well, and also in some previous versions of the big Multistrada. Somehow there seems to be a lag in operation. I rarely notice that there is a ride-by-wire system on motorcycles, but once something starts bothering you and you try to realize what it is, it may turn out to be this. And regardless of a mode, it behaves a bit like there was an automatic gearbox that would first have to think a little bit what to do and then step into action. I kept noticing a similar sort of delay here. Not the nicest thing, but I guess I myself could live with it. I just want you guys to be aware. And you can already feel it when revving the bike at a standstill, so that may be a good starting point. And I hope that Ducati can fix that in the future, but if not, it's not that terrible. I started off with suspension in medium stiffness, both in the front and in the rear. Then the V2 is nicely flat, it's nicely sporty, and it's pretty stiff when you get to some uneven parts of pavement. Then I switched to a setting called softer, and I actually haven't even realized throughout all that time that there is a mode called the softest, so one further. But there's a good explanation for that, and I'll tell you what it is in a moment, as it was a pain in the yeah, that was a pain. So in the softer, it really is softer, and you may ride quite comfortably on rougher roads, and not taking into account the seat, it rides quite nicely. I liked this mode much more. However, then immediately when starting to use the front brake, the front suspension would dive like a horse trying to throw me off its back. The difference between the modes here is huge, and props for that. And of course, that dive is not cool at all. It annoyed me a bit, but what Ducati has achieved, thanks to its pretty complex, crazy complex actually menus and customizable riding modes, is that you may go and simply keep the front in the stiffer mode and then the rear in the softer mode. And that's fantastic. Most bikes don't give you that option to separately adjust front and rear via electronic suspension. You just choose a mode that affects the whole bike. That's all you can do, but not here. Here you can separately work with the front and rear, and it's awesome. Now, about that huge pane that is connected also to suspension adjustment. Well, first of all, there are two ways of getting to those riding modes, to adjusting them. One is via pressing and holding one of the buttons on the left side on the handlebar, and the other is through a menu button shown on a display. So you've got to navigate there on the display and just go there. Now, getting there this way lets you to adjust the modes, including the suspension, which I like to play with on the fly, depending on what sort of road I am. I don't play with ABS, I don't play with traction control, I don't play with engine response, but with suspension I do. I do like doing that. I would like it at least. But here it's just not that easy unless you stop, first of all, that's the first requirement. And then you've got to get into one of the sub-menus and change all that for both wheels. So it's not quick, it's not comfortable, especially if you've got to stop to do that, as the bike knows that half of us would crash trying to go through all that while riding. And there's one switch that you can do all that with. And yeah, that's the switch that does actually everything in here. So there's my complaint. I would much rather have a separate adjustment of just suspension, and I could even have an extra button for it. I think I would swallow that. I'm not a fan of not having buttons. Here's not even the end, as there is another menu where you may choose a suspension setting for a solo rider, with a passenger, with luggage, and so on. So there are at least 3 places that I have discovered that are all about suspension, and that's a little bit too much for me. And then, when you encounter a stretch of road that suits your suspension setting, it's easier to come across a different surface and adapt it to the suspension setting rather than to adapt the suspension setting to the road. But then you may truly enjoy the ride and how the bike handles in corners. And not only, as there's a real pleasure to work with this bike, as it's quite easy to make it change directions. It is quick when doing that. On top of that, it doesn't fight you, and it allows you generally to do a lot. And I enjoy the way it handles at all kinds of speed. At low speeds, it's well balanced and it is light enough, I think, while at higher speeds, it also feels fine and under control. Only sometimes when you push it, you may notice it losing a bit of stability, but that's when you get close to its boundaries. And it's still acceptable, and it only happens when you do something that you likely shouldn't do anyways. And I must say that this bike is pretty capable overall, and I'm impressed by the way it eats corners, by the way it swallows bumps as well. You can ride it around just for fun, to enjoy the lean and its acceleration. If you've got the front suspension in medium setting, you may also enjoy braking with not that much front end dive. So having all this, why does this Multistrada exist when there's already another Multistrada which is quite similar, the V2 S? It's more comfortable, yeah, and it's a bit quicker, but it handles worse. Yet still, both bikes are competent and they are both high-performance motorcycles. With this V2 having all those suspension options, you can make it ride in almost any way you want. That's great, that's awesome, that's really nice. And I feel it can ride better than the V4. So why buy the bigger and more expensive one when this one is right here and even looks pretty much the same? Or then why does this one exist? Well, what? To kill the sales of a V4? But it doesn't really do that as far as I know. And there may be some reasons for that. So first of all, looking at the display, you know that this is not the most modern system, at least in terms of navigation, in terms of user experience. It may push you away if you want the best out of the best today, or the best of Ducati, at least in terms of that. The windshield works and moves the windstream with no turbulences, but it's way too short and it's so loud overall behind it. The adjustment system works the same as in the V4, so just grab it and move it. I think it's actually the best system out of them all out there. It's easy, quick, it works, and you can use it with just one hand when riding. But what I would need to do would be to replace the windshield with something taller and aftermarket. It's hard to hear anything except for wind hitting your helmet. And the sound of this V2 engine is quite pleasant. It becomes more throaty and exciting at higher RPM. So we clearly have yet another reason to ride this Multistrada V2 aggressively. Maybe not always, as the rear brake is basically useless, since when you touch it, ABS kicks in immediately and you've got close to zero braking power, so you shouldn't even bother touching it. And you may help yourself by reducing gears, and in the V2S you've got a quick shifter, which indeed is quick, but on the other hand you've got to kick it. You've got to properly kick it in order to change gears up or down. It requires a lot of force, but the clicks are clear and the transmission never missed a gear. And I appreciated the quick shifter being there is because of that handlebar thing and my delicate situation in a sitting form because of the seat. I was able to hold the bars with a firmer grip, not reaching for the clutch lever, just using the quick shifter. So thanks Ducati. Still, remembering that below 4,000 RPM, this V2 doesn't do anything, you will be changing gears very often. And this is worth paying attention to, as you simply won't be able to avoid that. You either push it and enjoy it, keep it steady on a highway, or you just don't push it, you change speeds and don't enjoy it as the bike forces you to change gears all the time. This may be a trade-off of having such a nice explosion up there in the range. Perhaps there is something instead of something. I also like that Ducati keeps using normal indicator switches that simply work. And this one is located where we all are used to having it located. So thanks once again, well done, and I do appreciate that, Ducati. Mirrors also are quite okay, and the front full LED cornering light in this V2S does the job. The bike of course has traction control. There is a center stand, while there is a warning message on the screen when your side stand is open. I do like that very much. And a keyless ignition sometimes works and sometimes needs the key to be brought closer for whatever reason. The fuel cap is not keyless, and then you've got to take that grenade of a remote key and work your way to unlock the cap. And it's not that easy to close it. Thankfully, we've got time to recover from that, as the fuel tank can carry 20 liters, so quite a lot, and again, as much as some of the big adventure motorcycles. So you won't be visiting the petrol station that's super crazy often. Ground clearance is, and watch this, it's either 17 or 22 centimeters, depending on a source that you check that in. But since suspension travel is 17 centimeters in the front and the rear, I am leaning towards 17 centimeters of ground clearance too, especially the 22 centimeters are in a Multistrada V4. So likely someone got confused there on the internet, and now many follow with that same information. But still, this is not confirmed by Ducati. The suspension travel is not super impressive, so the bike won't swallow big bumps like some other bigger adventure motorcycles. I mean big bumps, or simply those bikes with more suspension travel and a softer setup. The front rim is 19 inches and the rear is 17 inches, while the whole bike in the S trim, so this V2S, weighs 225 kilograms with fuel, so not bad here. Build quality also seems fair, and like in other Ducatis, could appear a bit better and more solid, but it's not bad overall. And there are some nice details like logos or a name of a Multistrada here and there. I would just add a real badge saying V2 to the bike instead of that weird sticker that looks like some kind of graphics instead of a presentation or introduction of the name of a model. We've got a chain drive here along with a good looking double-sided swing arm. So again, why does this Multistrada V2 exist, knowing all that? I bet it's mostly supposed to attract those who are sort of scared of adventure motorcycles over 1,000 cubic centimeters of engine displacement, and they simply don't want to feel that they've got the largest, the heaviest, the biggest cow from the lineup. And it should serve that purpose, doing most of the things that those larger adventure bikes do, and while not doing it worse actually. It does feel lighter also and more supermoto-like than quite a few of those, and since this was the idea likely, it serves its purpose. And if it does something even better at the same time, like with sheer number of suspension settings, with better handling at times, and again, feeling like its weight is more manageable, then let's just take it the way it is. If not for a super wide handlebar with those crazy big handguards, it would be a great bike for riding in the city, I think. But not too crowded, it needs space to breathe and to get to those high RPMs for you to enjoy the ride actually. On the other hand, it also doesn't have any heat issues, which is not that obvious with Ducati. Look at the V4 review. And I wouldn't notice any of annoying vibration except for what happens under 4,000 RPM, of course. I would have to work with that position on it because of that handlebar with weird angles. The seat that would have to be replaced or modified. Maybe I'm super crazy spoiled looking at my favorite lovely office chair, the 7G11, which is electric, wrapped in leather and it moves in 18 directions. You can check them out at powerseats.eu. I'm also involved with the brand. Anyway, probably the windshield also would have to be replaced with a taller one if you would like to, not feel the Spanish weather all the time on your face, in your helmet. And I'd have to make it a little bit more soft and more cozy doing all this. Maybe also I would replace the grips with some thicker ones. Then I feel that this could be a really great bike. I wouldn't even mind it's all the display, and I could live with a fuel cap that is not killers. Come on, 20 liters, that will last. I feel that it's a bike that is worth looking into, provided that you've already paid your mortgage and you own your car as the price tag is, well, it is typical for Ducati, but then exactly, well, you're getting a Ducati for that money. I'm giving this Multistrada V2 S a 7.5 out of 10 on Vitol's recommendation board, and I would have given it 8 if not for that weak performance under 4,000 RPM. Everything else I think can be fixed mostly, and mostly with ease on this bike. I suspect maybe even a different handlebar if you would find that something could be done better. Now, you gotta love the customizability here. I'm going to make a video with a head-to-head comparison of this V2S and a V4S that I've ridden, so subscribe and stay tuned for that.